Welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 174, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Matt Bendett, who's the co-founder of Peerspace. Peerspace is one of the largest marketplaces to book spaces and venues for activities and events like photo shoots, weddings, meetings, pop-ups, and more. Peerspace has also raised over $39 million in capital from top investors like Foundation Capital and Google Ventures. This is a great chat with Matt, where we went back to the founding story and first steps for starting Peerspace, some of the early challenges they faced. We got to learn more about how it's evolved and scaled to become one of the largest marketplaces for booking spaces and venues. We discussed topics like expansion and growth. Matt shared some of his key learnings, tips for early stage founders, and we also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation, and they're going to find it a great watch to the end. So Matt, this is a group chat is long overdue, and it's awesome to have you join us here today. I'm really excited to dive into all of your experience and learnings with Peerspace. Before we do, though, I think it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background for those that might not know you here.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mike, for having me. I really appreciate what you're doing with Everything Marketplaces. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of my background. So I started my career at EA, Electronic Arts, the video game company, in marketing, and it taught me a lot about large company dynamics. It was also a very supportive environment to build a professional skill set. The first learning that I had, in fact, was just to remove my biases and become really customer centric. I worked on a franchise called The Sims, and our primary target audience was teenage girls. And so I had to really get to the heart of what that audience was looking for and make sure that we were building the right product and going to market with it in an effective way. And so that's something that I really take from those early days. I spent 9 years within marketing and product functions at the company. But ultimately, I yearned for something more entrepreneurial with greater personal efficacy that I couldn't really get in a large company. And that's what brought me to startups. I didn't initially think that I was going to launch a company and be a co-founder, but that's what ended up happening. I started Peerspace with my co-founder, who was an ex-EA colleague. He had gone on to get his MBA and was back in the Bay Area looking to found a company. And so we ended up teaming up. I ran all our non-technical functions, including marketing, operations, go-to-market, and some G&A items. And yeah, we touched every area of the business over 10 plus years. And I recently departed Peerspace a couple months ago. But it was, it's been a great ride. The company is growing, is doing really well. I'm excited to see the next phase of the company and what happens. But it's just been really the, highlight of my career to build something from scratch and work through all the hurdles and sort of prove to the world what we can do and that this product really needs to exist and end up serving millions of people around the world. So yeah, so that's a little bit about my background.
Great background. So thanks for sharing with us on that. It's really, really incredible to see what you and the team have built with Peerspace. But I actually wanted to go back to the very beginning though. So what was the founding story for Peerspace, and what were the first steps that you took to start it as a marketplace at the time?
Yeah, so uh, my co-founder and I came to Peerspace from two different angles. There was one angle, which is that commercial space is plentiful but underutilized. And this is, I think, key to a lot of marketplaces today. But for us at the time, it felt fairly novel. The second part of that is access to creative and inspiring spaces is difficult to find. Thinking back to my time at EA, we had an awesome campus. It was built for making creative software. And when I left that experience, I realized that that's a rarity. Not everybody has access to spaces where they can do their best work. And so that was where I really came at it. And you put those two things together, and Peerspace exists. It's a marketplace where we can solve both of those problems. We can provide extra utilization and revenue to our supply, our hosts, while we allow our guests to have memorable events, memorable moments. And so We learned there was an opportunity over time to disrupt events, and specifically, we needed to do so. We needed to rely on what I think of like four primary areas. So we needed new types of supply, and these were creative, unique event venues, not necessarily the standard event venue or the hotel conference room or ballroom. We needed enterprising venue owners or supply that really was also entrepreneurial and wanted to do things in different ways than the ways they had traditionally been done. We needed transparent and non-discriminatory pricing. So something that we could post publicly and say, hey, this is what you're getting. This is what it includes. And it's really easy to book. And then I guess that leads into the last one, which is a frictionless customer experience, really through the transaction funnel on the demand side. And those things allowed us to be disruptive in the space and to create a new wedge in events. And of course, we were inspired by Marketplace at the time. This was 2013 when we originally launched. So we were inspired by Airbnb, particularly their consumer focused design approach. I think that's what we wanted to take into events, which we knew were going to be B2B and B2B to C, but we wanted to have this prosumer angle and we wanted it to be a delightful experience. And so yeah, so that's kind of how we started Peerspace together. We came together to solve this problem. Did a lot of things, and I can talk more about them, but did a lot of things in those early days that don't scale that you have to do. And I think if we didn't do those things, then we wouldn't be where we are today. And maybe just one more item on that is the right time in our careers to take on that business and that challenge. It involves a full bet on yourself when you're starting an early stage company. You're going to be working nights and weekends. You're going to be juggling investor pitches along with customer research and offshore product design meetings to bring this thing to life. And so you have to create the early inertia yourself. And that's what we did. So yeah.
No, you mentioned a lot of different topics that we're going to get into here. But at that kind of in the very beginning, in the kind of earlier stages, as marketplaces, we of course face the chicken and the egg or the cold start problem. So how did you get your kind of first listings on the platform? And start to generate demand or bookings, and kind of really get the flywheel spinning.
Yeah, good question. I mean, this is where I spent most of my time at Peerspace because I was on the expansion growth ops side of things. And I think at the time we ended up, if I'm being honest with myself, we stumbled around in the dark a lot here in the early days, trying to figure out what is the playbook? What should it be? How do we win? At the time, we didn't have the everything marketplaces community where there was so much information and content sharing happening. There was investors giving their opinion. There were some scarce blog posts, which are actually, I think, still some of the best ones. Like Casey Winters has written a lot of great things on marketplaces that everybody should read. It's talking about the chicken and the egg and how, you should approach marketplaces. There's a lot of talk about winner takes all and which side of the marketplace you go with. And I think as a learning, every marketplace is a little bit different, and your approach might need to be tailored to what kind of marketplace you are. For a prosumer oriented marketplace, we thought at the time that if we could capture all the supply, then the marketplace would look really viable and the flywheel would kind of start by having as much supply as possible. I think what we learned is, yes, there's this 80-20 rule where 20% of the marketplace supply are driving 80% of the revenue. And I would say it's probably even more heavily weighted, like 90-10. So what happens in that scenario is your marketplace looks vibrant if a customer comes to the site looking for a listing, but it's pretty unreliable, the experience, right? They might knock on several doors and nobody answers, and that could create a bad experience. So what we learned over time is there's credibility that comes with supply, but you really need them to be engaged. which means you also need early demand, either volumes of demand or high frequency of use from a smaller demand pool. And we focused on championing the key hosts early on. And so we said, okay, these guys are doing things exactly like we would want them to be. And so let's really lean into making them evangelists for the franchise, making sure they have lots of bookings, and getting them really involved. And so yeah, what we ended up doing over time is, yes, we had a decent amount of supply, many of which would lapse because they just weren't the right supply or the right, cohort of hosts. But we would lean into the ones that were driving the bookings, and then we would hang on for dear life to drive conversion. Like we had humans calling hosts, calling guests to make these early bookings happen, making sure they had a great experience. These are the tactics that don't scale early on, but I think you have to do. So we'd host community events. We create host ambassador programs. Our power host program was something we did early on to just make sure that they got the love. We would do phone calls, be present and available, or be in person if we could to help meet a host or a guest. There was surprise and delight initiatives we would do where we would send, a box of cupcakes to the guests when their team would have an offsite early on or an event that were, of course, Peerspace branded, just to kind of show like, hey, we're really happy that you're here. Thanks for trusting us and booking with Peerspace. And I think that it's very hard to measure what that did, but I really do think it helped us in the early days and created some momentum, which started to build in our first cities, which were the Bay Area and Los Angeles. So yeah, I think that's kind of what we learned in the early days. I'd say probably after we launched 3 or 4 cities, we got to like a magic number of what we think we needed to see like the next tranche of growth happen. And so we ultimately said like, okay, depending on the size of the market, we need 50 to 100 spaces to start, and that we would get inflection points at different milestones. You get your first 100 bookings, you get your first 100 published reviews. At some point, that's going to lead the next group of demand in, and see more credibility and trust in the marketplace and the platform, and that'll add to more bookings. It wasn't scientific in those early days, I have to say, but we tried to create a repeatable process as we went to New York and then Chicago and other cities like Seattle along the way. So, so yeah, that this is like the hardest part is kind of getting things started. But I think the biggest learning I had is for expansion specifically, you need somebody owning that process only from a strategic standpoint. They need to be relentless, have a lot of agency, to own that strategy and maintain the resources to keep things going as the business grows. You're always going to need this muscle. And so if the business is growing or product development is happening and you're getting this urge to sort of centralize some of these things, but um, you're not in many markets yet. There's always going to be that need in the early stage for the local presence. Even you may not be local, you may be remote, but the focus and like babysitting these markets and these early customers and making sure that they understand that there's people behind the service. I think that's really important in those early days. And that's something that you will always need. And the types of functions will scale a little bit and evolve as things grow. But you definitely need to be focused on expansion strategy and try to focus that person and not have them be bogged down with other parts of the job as well.
Those are lots of great examples as far as focusing on supply and empowering them, and then also jumping over to expansion as well. But I guess going back to supply though, it's I guess it's worth noting that there's such a unique kind of selection of supply on Peerspace. So how did you think about that when it comes to I think like the supply strategy and kind of growing that in the market?
Yeah, so things evolved definitely from market to market. It started with us going, door to door, eventually became a really tight supply lead gen qualification, outbound SEO process as well, until we got more inbound coming in. So it kind of evolves with phases. And as we realized too, that we can't just scale this marketplace by putting local people in every single market, which is kind of what we were doing. We wanted to become a sustainable business. And so that also drove some of this process as we went over time. Um, but one thing that's unique to Peerspace and possibly other marketplaces have this problem too is we deliberately built a broad horizontal marketplace. And the reasoning for us was we have a single unit of underutilized supply. Why shouldn't they be able to capture demand for many different types of demand? The problem that creates a larger TAM, and if you're ever trying to attract venture capital, if you go to market with them and you say, "Hey, we're working on this really narrow niche," they're going to question how big the market is. But for us, it's like you can have all kinds of events in the same space, and that's how we drive lots of bookings to our supply. Um, what we learned over time is that that horizontal approach really creates a challenge for focus, and it also adds a ton of complexity in how you analyze the marketplace, how you look at the data and think about like where do we have traction? Do we have product market fit? The bookings show that we did this, but what kind of bookings are they? And what part, what geos within the market are we seeing this growth? And how do we talk about that in a way that's going to align us all internally and be able to pitch to investors or our board or whomever? So that lack of focus made things more complicated. And we decided to focus our efforts first into primary verticals. So I mentioned events, production, and meetings. But you actually need to go much deeper than that. Like, what kind of event? Who is the target segment? And knowing that helps you focus. That relentless focus, I think, is what you really need if you're going to survive as a marketplace. You can have a vision for where the marketplace goes over time, but if you build for that vision early on, it's kind of a recipe for disaster. Now, I say that, after us having, I don't know, been an exception to the rule, but the truth is we really did end up focusing over time when we started seeing traction in production. And this really happened to a large degree during COVID and kind of everybody being locked at home and meetings and events not really being viable, but like this insatiable need to create content was emerging. That's when we were like, okay, focus here, put everything into this growth channel against this audience. And that's where we really drove true product market fit for a specific audience. We looked at, kind of indie producers and content creators and directors that wanted to be able to create content in a very turnkey manner, which our marketplace facilitated well. And then we built a bunch of additional features that were really speaking to that audience and helping them convert better. So the business grew really fast. We couldn't pinpoint the specific source or like what channel, where is it driving from? I think it was a mix of macro trends and also us just being focused and ready to capitalize and not having to worry about all these other verticals and segments that we were looking after. So, that led us over time at Peerspace to ride the wave of each vertical. It in retrospect, having the broad marketplace also helps you do that. But, as one starts to cool off or you feel like growth isn't as attainable in one vertical, or maybe a certain geo is leaning really heavily into a different vertical, then, we can put a strategy behind how we're going to achieve growth in those. And that's what the biggest marketplaces in the world have done. So you inevitably do get there, but I think really focusing is the most important thing. So yeah, I think, the last point I'd make is paying attention to the macro trends, really looking for those opportunities for your next move when you do decide, like, okay, we want to expand our audience into this segment. We either want to go up market or we want to go cross market to another vertical. Um, that's really important, and you need to think about your platform as what is your unique edge. For us, it was we wanted to really make this a transactional marketplace that reduce a lot of friction. uh, I don't like using this word, but democratizing, access to the space and just making it easier, right? Than going through all these contracts and negotiations to put on a birthday party at a private venue, right? So, looking for those macro trends is seeing where's the avenue to like enter the market and create that wedge, or what is your demand data, if you have any, show you should be doing next. And how are you going to get there?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the topic as far as, horizontal kind of versus vertical. But, if we kind of focus on the demand side, you mentioned as far as, the various kind of categories or use cases. But did you also kind of move more up market when it comes to demand?
Yeah, in certain respects, we did. We would try it. I think marketplace, all startups are always a prioritization of resource exercise is kind of what you're doing. And sometimes going up market requires additional product features, different types of salespeople, and just a heavier investment. And so I think we tested a lot of it, and our hope was that by creating a really delightful product experience, that we would be able to bring enterprise or up market customers in. I think on the supply side, we're able to do that. We attracted property owners that had like many different buildings, for example. On the demand side, we work with different corporates and have some programs. But for us, it was more about like exploring the horizontal nature of the marketplace and what other verticals our platform, which is really resilient, especially at this point, what we could cater to. So, for us, when we think about growth or expansion, it was really about, can we take this platform experience to different markets and create the network effects in a geographic sense? And let's cover as much ground there geographically as we can before building, I don't know, Peerspace Pro or the enterprise experience. Yeah.
And then another topic that I wanted to discuss is monetization. And so I'd love to know a little bit more about how monetization and the revenue might have potentially changed through Peerspace as it evolved. And then I noticed too, you also of course have like add-ons and kind of services additionally with the spaces. So could you maybe share a little bit more about that? And what point in time you introduced that?
Definitely. So I'll start at the beginning in terms of how we decided to create our revenue model. And we thought we were really bringing the most value to our supply. And at the time, Airbnb was probably the most established marketplace, the most similar one in our space. And all their fees were on the guest side, and hosts paid very little. I think they still do, right? But for us, we're like, we're going to market your business for you. You don't have to do anything. That's worth something. That's where the value creation is happening. So we're going to take a commission from that side. And so we introduced the host service fee as the most heavily weighted side of our revenue model. And that was kind of, I don't know, new or new. It wasn't like common thinking at the time, but we decided to go with it. And I think it made the most sense for us. And it ended up being beneficial because we also had opportunities to monetize the demand side, particularly all the customer support that we provide them, guarantees, chargeback protection, things that we ultimately help the hosts with. But we realized we needed additional tooling, and so anyway, our take rate ended up getting to a certain percentage, and it became a mix of host and guest fees. Somewhat split towards the end, I would say. And so that was the first kind of foray into monetization. I think we got a lot smarter about it over time. We built in kind of variable pricing models on fees depending on how much what the ASP of the transaction was. We decided we at one point we had a concierge service, is what we called it, which was the Peerspace team connecting guests and their companies with vendors that could host like catering or talent or DJ and whatnot during the booking, and we charge a fee for that, and we would work with preferred vendors that knew how our platform worked and were generally going to create a good experience when entering the host spaces. And then at one point, we ended up building an add-on system so hosts could offer their own add-ons. And that was a way that we could monetize the experience and ultimately go beyond just creating a space opportunity for them. We want our guests to have memorable moments. And I think part of that is making the planning process really easy. And so if the entire event can come together, that was our goal. And so, that's where add-ons came into play. Um, and and yeah, lots of monetization strategies come up when you're also trying to think about like what is our optimal value offer here, and is there smart ways to do it, which you've got two sides of the marketplace. You've got your supply where those are your most frequent customers, right? Because they're using you all the time. And then you've got your demand, which come in less frequently. And there's just like lots of ways to think about how you want to structure your pricing and how you want to evolve it over time to maximize the value you're providing to your most loyal customers.
Pricing is always a fun topic to chat through. So, and I can also imagine that some of the additional kind of value add services are a way that you prevented disintermediation as well. So,
Yeah, exactly. And lots of stuff like that. We introduced, we were a marketplace that built a custom, this is very common now, but at the time we had a custom insurance program that was just for Peerspace hosts, and it allowed them to, have additional coverage. That was a value add that we just kind of rolled into their fees. We added a property damage guarantee at one point later on. And ultimately, what you're trying to do to reduce disintermediation, I think the altruistic way to think about it is create as much value as possible so that hosts and guests can imagine booking off platform. And then in reality, there's a mix of the carrot and the stick that needs to happen. If you have a host or a supply that's making good money on the platform, they obviously don't want to risk being terminated. And so they tend to be pretty loyal and understanding of the rules. And so you think about like how can you help them enforce your community guidelines for you, and where do you need to weigh your value offerings. And so, providing more tools for your supply, I think is a good way to lean in and ultimately reduce disintermediation.
certainly agree with that. So that was something with Studio Time. We're trying to get the supply side to help with that as well. So.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, Peerspace is a more operationally complex marketplace, the more we kind of dive into things here. So do you have any maybe learnings, from running it as an operationally complex marketplace and, tips for founders looking to build them that you could share with us?
I spent 11 years doing Peerspace, and what I will say is marketplaces are very hard. They're complicated, but they're super rewarding. There's a reason why some of the most transformative businesses over the last 20 years are marketplaces. They're asset light. They have, if you figure it out, they've got great network effects, which means their, growth can compound. And it's also like just kind of rooted in this disruptive nature. Like you can bring many different suppliers to solve a problem. You don't have to build something custom, like a SaaS or something. You can solve this by getting the right groups together and aligning the incentives. And so, what I would say is, it's important to map out your vision to understand what the possible opportunity or your TAM of your marketplace is, but stay hyper focused as you create that initial wedge. And I mentioned that earlier. I think sustainable growth is important for marketplaces, especially right now. The hype train is fully on AI, as it probably should at this point. But just think about what that means for marketplaces. You're either going to be an AI enabled marketplace or you're going to be more traditional tech enabled marketplace. Either way, it's just sound business to make sure that you're building for sustainability and making sure that you're in a position where you can create the best outcome for yourself as a founder, and for your employees and shareholders. And I think things swung really far in that direction in like 2022, with a push towards profitability. And for businesses like Peerspace that understood that, I think a lot of marketplaces also we kind of create these shadow markets when we start out because the nature of what you're trying to disrupt via a platform that is a marketplace is something that maybe not all investors really get and want to throw a lot of, you know, money against. So for marketplaces like ours, we're ready to do that. And I think that's really important, and it allows you to, hold your own cards. So I think that's important. Sustainable growth, reinvesting growth back into the business. And, you know, as far as tips for other founders, I would say ask yourself, is this your life's work, or could this be your life's work? Could you commit 5 to 10 years to this mission when you're evaluating what your business is? Are you able to build something without venture funding if you needed to? Like, could you sustain it? And are you prepared to go through what would be kind of a slower slog? I would say, if you have a lot of venture funding, you can burn through that really fast. It doesn't mean you're going to be successful. So, can you go without it, or can you go with just, taking what you need so that you can continue to, like I say, like hold the cards here. Um, as far as organization, I would say, think about like your operating system that you have, and how much effort you need to spend here depends on, your personal dynamic, your team dynamic, and just like what stage of company you are. But is it discipline? Do you have, specific ways of decision making that are like logically rooted and, able to keep you moving in the right direction? And, are you using like an OKR system, or how are you prioritizing? I think it's good to be thinking about that early on, so you don't waste time. And so you really stay focused on the areas that you're trying to move in the near term. Um, I don't know. Some other thoughts I had is like, does your co-founder or someone on your founding team have technical aptitude? I think that's really it's a key difference maker. I don't, obviously. I can't code, and maybe with AI, you can do some of that easier than before, but it's really hard if both uh, co-founders or like the early team is having to outsource all the engineering and product work. You can move a lot faster if you find somebody who wants to be on this journey with you that is capable of building your vision, if you are not technical yourself. As far as like, this kind of goes back to prioritization, I'd say think about your next 6 months and where you want to be, and work that into weekly or biweekly sprints, and just like really make sure that you're checking boxes for the most important things every time you go through it. So that you can say like, hey, this is what I got done this week. This is what I set out to do, and be really honest with yourself, because I think being a founder is a lonely, very lonely journey. It's very hard. And you need to kind of utilize your own organizational tools to, keep yourself on the right track. Those are things where you might have to do it because you only have a certain amount of funding and you're worried about what your runway is, or you're just kind of not. In my case, I had worked at a really big company that was too big to fail, and suddenly you're fully betting on yourself, and you just need to kind of build systems for yourself to stay on track and to make sure you're prioritizing. So, those are the things that came to mind for me. Um, and what I would say that, founders in the early stages are thinking about.
Those are going to be a super helpful tips. So thanks for sharing those with us. So you did mention fundraising a few times. So, could you share maybe what the fundraising journey has been like?
Yeah, so fundraising marketplaces are tough. Their investors, I think, are excited about the opportunity because it is innovative and just can be disruptive. And they know that marketplaces are asset light, and especially if you have a large market, there's a big opportunity there. But when you are at your earliest stages, you're approaching investors as an unknown quantity, and they need to believe like, how is this better than the alternatives? And, can you show me the traction you have essentially? And that was a lot of our experience early on. I think it's important and you should expect to have some sort of meaningful traction in order to drive any interest at all. It becomes a lot easier in kind of later stages, I would say, like, Series B plus, because you can rely on, the inbound data that you have and, your analytics and your forecasting and be able to show that this business can grow to X size. But early on for us, I mean, we had lots of investor meetings. We would get really far. We would get some no's, many no's, and a couple yeses along the way. But in the pre-seed and seed stage, we would just ask some of these investors. We would say, what would you want to see from us in order to seriously consider this investment, particularly if we thought it was kind of more of an informational meeting. And I think we were told, like, come back when you have 500 bookings or 500 transactions. And what I took from that is they just wanted to see some data. They wanted to see that there was like some kind of trend emerging that you were solving for, and have something to sort of poke and prod on to decide if this was something that was working for them. So, so yeah, I would recommend. This is another reason why I say, like, figure out if you can get by without funding, because you probably have to build something, launch it, and actually get the bookings and demonstrate that the bookings are happening in a way that is close to your desired vision for the product. Like, it can be scalable. I think once we demonstrated that, it became a little easier to convince investors that this was at least, worth taking the meeting on, worth doing the due diligence on. But yeah, fundraising is hard, and from what I hear now, it's even harder right now. And there's lots of reasons for that. And so I would just encourage everybody to think about, like, how far can you get with what you have, or where do you need to be by what time in order to say that this is, viable to get you to the next phase.
Got a few head nods too when you mentioned that fundraising was hard right now. So we're gonna get into the group Q&A here. So, hey,
Okay.
Mason, do you want to come on?
Yeah, thanks. My question is about trust and safety and regulations. I'm curious if you faced any headwinds in either of those channels and how you took those on.
Yeah, so I ran our trust and safety. I built it and kind of grew it. The function, for trust and safety, we focus on two things: the sort of fraud prevention and risk prevention side, and then I guess three things. The third thing would be like regulation and working with city government and different types of municipalities to avoid regulation. I'd say that was like the least frequent. There's a couple incidences of that we kind of worked through. And it really came down to explaining, and this is particular to Peerspace, um, that we're not a short-term rental business. We're not providing transient occupancy like a hotel would, or like an Airbnb where you're sleeping in the space and someone's vacating. This was like space sharing. Most of our businesses is in commercial space as well. So it's like a business having another business use their space. So anyway, that was less of a challenge for us. But what I made sure to do as our mini GC is I, had a, Rolodex of different types of legal resources, whether they're sort of geographic land use attorneys or there was a, liability litigation help. And then I'd have, contract legal over here. So I would always have some resource or some expert that I could reach out to. And I would negotiate terms with them to keep it, efficient. I had to kind of manage it and make sure that we weren't spending too much on legal. So I don't know if that was the aspect you were asking about, or if it was more on like the fraud prevention and risk prevention side. But on that side of things, that was the side that we really started scaling up. We built, our own proprietary risk scoring tools and kind of models for that to make sure that what's being booked, we know what the bookings were that were possibly going to be risky. We learned obviously as different things came in and tweaked our models accordingly. And then, on the fraud prevention side, it's really just about making sure that you have good tooling there. And we use many different SaaS enterprise softwares to sort of help us out with that. And to make sure that we were introducing healthy friction where necessary without having a lot of people churning through the process because that would otherwise would book and were low risk individuals. And I'd be happy to talk more about this in further depth later.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for the question, Mason. Wouldn't be a conversation on marketplaces without trust and safety.
Yeah.
Hey, Jared, do you want to come on? Please raise your hand.
Sure. Hey, Matt, Jared from Napper here.
Hey,
I was
Jared.
curious how you guys prioritize customer service, because if you look at platforms like Airbnb and Vrbo, this seems to be something they're really struggling with. They both have a 1.3 score on Trustpilot. You guys have a 4.4. So clearly you're doing something differently for the better in this area. And for our use case, I'm curious because we have 4 to 10 hour hotel rates, and we would love to expand it so that consumers can host their apartments and homes eventually. But the part that worries me a little bit is how do we open it up to that and still provide good service? We don't have to worry about that with hotels right now. So how did you guys focus on this and keep it good?
That's a good question, Jared. I think I'd like to say that it just evolved as part of the company's culture and DNA, that the customer experience was really important to us outside of the product and the day of experience. And I think part of that was just because we were so constrained on the product side in the early days. We had to step in. We had kind of what is our customer experience team, like part of their job was like also helping to make sure that everything went well and kind of maybe even being a little bit, too in customers' faces in those early days. And I think that just like evolved over time into really caring about the customer experience as we scaled and as the, more features in the product did come online. And we got more inbound ticket volume. There were a lot of things that the users couldn't do, which would normally be, a shitty experience that like you can't, I guess for a long time, maybe you couldn't cancel your booking or you couldn't, we didn't have cleaning fees in the product. And so we had to take these transactions on the side through our support team. We would then build, processes and templates around all of that. And we would always have like a first principle that we needed to be human. We needed to be, empathetic and not come off in a robotic way. And so maybe that was just because it took some time for the scale of the business to grow, that kind of the CX team was able to catch up alongside it. But we really invested in that part of the business. And I think that's something that um, really gives marketplaces a leg up, especially if you're constrained on the product side. Is where do your operations team, like, where can they step in and add more value? And I think it's really about just making sure that every customer has a great experience and wants to come back. And so as that pertains for a business like yours, yeah, you have a very consistent, reliable resource in hotels right now because they're built on hospitality. And if you start working with residential, you probably need to do some host education there, training on what the day of experience needs to be. And then you can't rely on that on your own. You have to be like ready and prepared to, help customers out if anything does get mixed up or there's misexpectations. So I don't know. That's what I would say. Is it's a key focus, and it's not to say that for a company like Airbnb that it's not. It might be that there's the scale of their operation is so massive that like no customer experience team of that size, can do what a company like Peerspace can do. I don't know.
Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on?
Yeah, my question for you, kind of early on when you're talking about your growth expansion strategy, you said this wasn't scientific, and that's often the case. So I'm curious, at what point in your company's kind of development did you become more scientific? How did you make that transition? What did those first experiments look like, and kind of what do things look like now?
Great question. Yeah, I think of our expansion in kind of four phases. The first phase is doing everything yourself in one market or a couple markets, where you're onboarding the supplier, acquiring them, you're connecting hosts and guests together. By the time you've got like, I don't know, for us, five or so markets, we started to say, okay, well, we can't just have like a city team in every single market. That's not going to work. How do we centralize some of these processes? And that's when it became much more important for us to, move away from spreadsheets into CRM tools and, create our sales pipeline for supply and start doing lead gen at a higher volume. The kind of that this is like our second kind of phase where we also saw some markets, and I really think if you're a geographic based marketplace, build some functionality into the platform that allows you to still take inbound from the markets in which you're not focused currently. We started seeing more hand raising in markets that we didn't think about that much. Like San Diego was one that kind of launched itself. And where like there were like 50 spaces coming on. They weren't really driving much demand for a while. Then suddenly people started booking, and maybe it was because people were kind of migrating down from LA for production shoots. But at some point, we're like, okay, San Diego's launching itself. Now let's put some marketing effort and ops effort into like formally launching that. And so that's the second phase where you say, okay, let's launch a bunch of cities at once, and here's how we do it. And like for us, that's when we built a host acquisition team that was kind of all based centrally, but had their own leads lists. We would kind of have them team up to do market launch functions and then kind of parachute into the next market and do that. We went through like a phase where we called Go National, which was about launching all those markets. And then the third phase is like launching internationally. Things are very different when once you decide to go across borders. There's legal issues, there's cultural considerations, and there's just like lots of hurdles to overcome. Your growth channels in the US, if that's where you're launching, may not carry over to France or the UK in the same way. And so for that phase, the third phase, I think it's you almost take a small step back, but you retain this playbook that you have from your second phase of like kind of centralized and high volume leads because you want to launch faster, but you also go back a little bit to this local presence. You want to feel local and credible to a new customer base that might see you as a foreign entity, right? And so for us, getting a foothold into new markets, it was really important to show that and demonstrate, like, yeah, there's these other competitors that we have that are based in your market that have been here for some time, but we actually have a team here and like we're going to support you. And so those were some of the things that we were doing in our initial markets that we decided to do internationally again. And the fourth phase is be live everywhere. And I think that's something that you can do kind of at any phase. It doesn't need to be sequential to the last phase. It can be something where if you build like a good growth and referral strategy, you're building organic supply, and that's ultimately going to drive demand into the platform. And so, yeah, we're sort of that's the stage that Peerspace is at now, live in the US, Canada, Europe, and Australia. And I think we said that earlier this summer, crossed over $500 million in GMV, over 1 million bookings, largely in North America, but the new markets are also growing nicely for us. And I wrote a blog post about this on Everything Marketplaces. You can check out about the learnings from international, where I expand a bit more on like just I think these are just considerations to make when you decide to expand to any new market. I've met a lot of founders who seem to be really eager to be like everywhere as soon as possible, and I find that problematic. I think that it's better to learn what you can and to really show growth and possibly product market fit before you even consider a second market or a second customer type that you're going after.
Fantastic answer. Thank you.
Thanks for the full walkthrough for us on that. Cool. So we're going to try to squeeze in one last question if we can. Hey, Bren, do you want to come on? I saw you sent me a message.
Thank you so much. And Matt, this was really, really helpful. I've got my co-founder on the line, Maria, as well. We are the founders of Our Day, which is a platform that matches consumers with event vendors. How did you handle getting as much like feedback as possible and implementing it? How did you prioritize getting feedback and then turning it around into the product?
Yeah, you have to make it part of your operating DNA. Either someone needs to own it or it's part of the company culture to always be talking to your customers. We did a lot of things in the early days where we would set up community events to make it like a fun, casual experience. But there was a definite focus for our team to get customer feedback in those sessions. So we might set it up as like a panel where they would hear from, our product team about new features we were running or taking their requests for features, but we were recording all of that information. And we were also trying to get a read on who these people were and what their needs and challenges are. We also, have done lots of focus testing, either one-on-one or kind of group settings. Found it pretty easy to do on Zoom. I think it's harder on the demand side than the supply side. The supply side is sort of wedded to you in a marketplace, right? They get their business through you. And so they're very eager to share feedback, and it's easier to talk to them and bounce things off the wall with them. With the demand side, it can be a little trickier. And you have to stay on it and make sure that you're getting a good swath of different potential audience customer feedback sessions in. And then, you get, so that's what you do qualitative. Quantitatively, we've done, you can do customer surveys if you have a captive audience to collect enough information there. And you can also put little pop-ups into your product if you're able to do so to gather information. We would do lots of painted door tests with functionality, which would be like, hey, we're considering this. Oh, thanks. We'll let you know when it's live, depending on how they click. And so I guess as I'm saying that out loud, that brings up another good point is like, just if you're on the ops side, making sure product is bought in on these things early on versus coming to them with like a list of 50 things that they need to go add to the product because you've heard about it. So finding ways to, um, collect that feedback and make sure your product team is sort of an active participant in that, whether they're like doing calls with you or they just know what you're undertaking and are expecting to receive, a prioritized list at the end can be really helpful. Um, I will say something that companies need to and founders just need to get comfortable with is you're always going to have a ton of customer insights and feedback that you really want to get into the product. And it's going to be hard. You're not always like some of the things that we really wanted to do the most would sit in the backlog for years, honestly. And it's not because people didn't want to make it happen. It was just, we didn't have a team of 500 devs, and 30 different pods to be able to get everything in. And what you're reminded of is, and maybe it's another reason for having like a good customer service team, is like you can still get by, right? There are ways to figure out how to solve customers' problems without fully being reliant on your technology.
Thank you so much. Super
Yeah.
helpful.
Well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but Matt, this is such a great chat. So appreciate taking the time to join us here, and it was also long overdue. So we really packed it in with all the experience and insights that you shared with us today. So we really appreciate joining us. I had one last question for you before we wrap things up, and that's if you could go right back to before you started Peerspace. What would you tell yourself about marketplaces?
I think I would have. This sounds negative, right? Because I was talking about how hard they are. But like I don't want that to be like, oh, I would think about whether or not this was worth doing because it totally was, right? But I don't think I knew when I started a business that it was going to be this big of a thing that was going to take, my, large part of my career to get to a certain point. I think it's just about like understanding, and I guess I wish I would have talked to more marketplace founders to learn about what it's like to work on these kinds of businesses, and get maybe some more tips and tricks and see around blind spots easier, than kind of what we did, where we really felt like we were going at it alone. A lot of times we didn't join an accelerator or anything like that. I don't know. In the end, I'm kind of, I don't know. Sometimes I think about it because I'm a Techstars mentor and I'm helping other founders, and I love to chat with founders today. It's like I wonder if there were other people that could have just been in my corner earlier on, to scale me alongside the business. So those are things that I'd probably think more about. Still deciding to do Peerspace, of course, but just kind of making sure I was prepared for what was ahead.
That's going to be a great parting advice for us all here. And we once again appreciate joining us and, now paying it forward to help other earlier stage founders. So last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
Yeah, so I'm on everything marketplaces. You can please add me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with you. I'm I'm starting to think about what's next. And I hope to, be able to consult, either in advisory capacity or possibly fractional. So I'll be around if you have questions. Like I said, LinkedIn and everything marketplace are good places to find me. I lurk on Twitter, but not necessarily the best place for me.
I'm sure you'll get lots of messages from founders teams here. So, well, thanks again for joining us today, and thanks everyone for the great questions.